cats are everywhere now. They, and like you say, there might be no apparent, difference to us, to the landscape. The difference is there's cats in it, which weren't there 200 years ago. So that's and the impact of cats on small mammals. So that the best way to think of a night parrot is, ecologically, it's like a small mammal. It comes out, it spends all its time on the ground. It's a seed eater. It's small. It's about 100 grams. It can fly, but it only flies to get to the next place where it's going to land on the ground and start feeding. So they are effectively, they're like a ground dwelling mammal in a lot of senses, which is why they're vulnerable to cats.
Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to the Birding Today podcast with me, Thomas Doerig. I hope you're doing well wherever you may be listening, whether in Australia or overseas as well. Welcome. Just a little bit of an introduction here. I'd like to point out that the ongoing giveaway with Treeswift Wildlife Nature will be coming to a deadline tomorrow. So the deadline to get your emails in to me telling me your favourite bird is tomorrow at 10 p.m. So if you haven't emailed yet, please do, and you'll be in the draw to win a customized birdwatching tour with Treeswift Wildlife and Nature. And please also make sure you like both Facebook pages, mine and Treeswift Wildlife and Nature. I'm also going to be doing a mailbag episode, the second one so far, which will be releasing soon. So if you've got any just random questions or thoughts or anything that you want to let me know, and I can read it out in the mailbag episode, that would be great as well. That's always good fun. Enjoy the episode. It was a great one with Nick, so I hope you settle down and have a cup of tea or a beer or whatever you may be doing, and I'll see you on the other side. Hello and welcome back to the Birding Today podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Doerig. I hope everyone's doing well out there. This is going to be a great episode because today's guest has been a birdwatcher for as long as he can remember. His earliest birding memory was watching his grandma feed rainbow lorikeets in her backyard, while his first twitch was a superb parrot near his hometown of Young in central West New South Wales. Wow. After leaving school, he joined the Air Force, which gave him an excuse to go birding around Australia and overseas. After 13 years, he left the Air Force and worked as an international bird guide, leading tours around Australia and internationally, with Papua New Guinea his favourite destination. Can't wait to talk about that. In 2016, some conservation capacity building work in Papua New Guinea led to an opportunity to do a PhD in conservation biogeography. And my guest today was lucky enough to spend that working on the Night Parrot, mainly in Western Queensland, but also in Western Australia. He now works for both Bush Heritage Australia and the University of Queensland on a range of threatened species, including some of Australia's rarest birds, like the night parrot, buff-breasted button quail, red goshawk, Carpentarian grass wren, northern masked owl, and plains wanderer. What a list. So please welcome Nick Leseberg on the show. How are you, Nick? Thanks so much for your time.
That's all right, Thomas. Thanks for having me, mate. Always happy to bang on about birds.
Likewise. Well, you're in the right place.
Good one.
And so the central topic of the show is the joy of birding. So what is it about birding that brings you joy?
Oh, it's hard to say. I mean, it's probably changed over time. Like when I was a kid, it was just like just a keen interest in the natural world. I don't know why particularly. It was sort of birding that got it, but just the idea to I just love the idea of being able to see things and work out what they are and look them up in a book. And I was a bit of a nerd like that as a kid, so that sort of thing attracted me. And that was so. Then I don't know. There's a 7 stages of grief. Maybe there's a 7 stages of birding or whatever. So you start like that, and then you become a bit, and then you sort of start to think, oh, actually, there's more birds out there than just in my backyard. Can I go and look for this bird over here? And my dad, as a young kid, was really good at that. My dad was not a birder, but he sort of recognised this little interest and was happy to encourage it as presumably as a way of getting me out of the house and being outside. So then you'd go look for this thing over there, and then you're like, oh, actually, when I go away on holidays, I can see all these eBirds. And then you become a twitcher, I think. As a kid, that's what you're really about. Like, where can I see new birds? And then then you can become like a national scale twitcher when you get your first car and that sort of thing. But now I'd say it's more, as you get older, you realize how the world works, that sort of thing. And I've really found an interest in this idea of conservation and what can we do to, so that my kids can go birding and have the same experiences that I did. And I think that's where I get some joy out of it now, which is not to say I, don't still twitch. I got added a new bird to my life list just last weekend, which is the first in a couple of years. But yes, I still do that side of things. But like I said, it's more now focused very much on the conservation side of things.
Excellent. Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting what you say about the joy of birding changing as time goes on, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it does vary with, and of course you have the same joy you had as a child, kind of, it stays with you, of course, but like different factors come into play as well, as it did for you. And you mentioned I always like going back to the origins, of a birder's journey. And you mentioned your backyard just then, and in the bio you sent me, your grandma used to feed the rainbow lorikeets. So tell me about that first initial contact with birds, if you remember it.
I don't. It's funny, I'm not sure if it was. I'm not sure quite what came first, but I remember when I was a kid, my mum used to buy us, as every mum does, buy the kids like colouring in books and that sort of thing. And I must have at some point taken a particular interest in the ones that had animals in them. And I remember this one particular colouring in book that had scenes from different countries. So there's like an African savanna, I particularly remember, and like an American desert. And you put the stickers in of all the little animals that were there. So I remember being interested in that. And then mum must have picked up on that, because then I remember getting a colouring in book that had some Australian birds in it. So then I got to know some of their names. And then, like I said, so I'm not sure if that came first or my grandma feeding the rainbow lorikeets in the backyard came first. Maybe they were about the same time, and there was an interaction there. But I distinctly remember my grandma used to live in Castle Hill in Sydney. And she used to, when she moved into the house that she lived in, she'd had a recipe handed down for the guy who used to live there, fed the lorikeets this mixture of sugar and water. It was, he'd put it out in the morning, they'd all come down and drink it, and then off they'd go. So I used to sit at the window looking out onto her back veranda, watching these birds intently, and just used to think, they were beautiful, and wanted to know what sort they were. And my dad, who's, like, as I just said, is not a bird watcher at all, he knew rainbow lorikeets. He called them rainbow Larrys or rainbow lorries or something like that. He knew what they were. And so I was like, oh yeah, wow, that's their name. And then I used to notice there were different ones would come in. And I know now that they're scaly-breasted lorikeets, but they would come in and I'd say, Dad, what's that green one? It's different. And my dad, a bit of a thinks he's pretty funny. He says, oh, I don't know, Nick, I think it's a Western sea green parrot was the name. He made up this name from Western. Like I said, it still sticks in my head. It's a Western sea green. And so then, and then my interest developed, and my grandfather, and a lot of people, a lot of older people back then just knew more about the natural world, because they probably, grew up in a time where there was more of it around it, they were more exposed to it. And he had a bird book, and I remember looking at that. He bought me my first bird book when I was about 6, and it was What Bird Is That? The Neville Cayley one, which most people would have had. And I remember pouring through it, trying to find Western sea green parrot. It was Dad, Western sea green parrot's not in here. There's this one that looks just like it. It's called scaly-breasted lorikeet. What do you think's going on? And that's like, oh, I don't know, Nick. Are you sure it's not in there? Have a closer look, Anyway, like I said, I know now that my dad was giggling away, thinking how hilarious this was. But like I said, that's my earliest memory, and that's how it got sparked. And from there, then you start, like I said, you start learning the names of a few more. And my dad, to his credit, identified this interest and nurtured it a bit. Took it. You would take me out, and there was an old Christian brother. Dad worked at was a teacher at a Catholic school, and there was an old Christian brother there who was a bird watcher, and Dad knew this and talked to him, and he lent me bird books and told Dad, oh, take him to this spot and take him here to see him, those sorts of things. And that's how I ended up twitching superb parrot, because where I lived was a sort of a bit of a hot spot for them at the time. They were pretty rare. They were still, people were still, there was a bit of concern about them. So Dad took me out to see superb parrots, and that was, like I said, that's my first twitch. So that's it. That's my earliest memories of birding anyway.
Yeah, fascinating. Really fascinating to listen to. And I think it's interesting what you said. A couple of things I want to touch on sort of off the bat is how people used to know more about nature.
For sure. Like certainly my grandfather, he definitely wasn't a bird watcher,
Mm.
but he knew, he just knew the names of the common birds and I used to sort of ask him about that. And he grew up in Western Sydney as well, in like around the Richmond Windsor area. And, they're just out more in nature. I think their parents probably knew more about nature because if they lived on the land and that sort of thing. It was just a bit of a thing. And you read, like, so some of the research I do around night parrots and some of the other species, you go back into the literature and that sort of thing. And old newspapers often used to have a section about nature, this is what's being seen around, like those sorts of things in old newspapers were pretty normal. So I think people were just a bit more connected than the sort of the busy, work-filled lives that we lead now.
Yeah, and it's linked with the rise of technology as well, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. And there's some people doing some really interesting research on this. Guys like Rich Fuller at University of Queensland that are really looking at, how does nature, how does our connection with nature, what does that do for us as humans and that sort of thing, which is really interesting. So, like, I enjoy that side of it. I like being connected to nature, and like I said, it's good. Like, it was certainly a thing that was more common in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And just also what you mentioned a couple of minutes ago was something about passing on the knowledge to your kids, or nurturing, as your dad nurtured your passion and your hobby. And I know that you have kids.
Yeah,
Do you do that as well to them?
yeah, it's a good question. So my supervisor at University of Queensland is a fellow called James Watson, who's a very most people in the birding world would have heard of James at some point. And he has a couple of brothers, and he remembers, and I've talked to him about. So he and his twin brother Alexander are both mad keen birders, and they got it off their dad. But their older brother wasn't a birder, and so James says, their older brother just never really twigged with him, and I think that he said their dad, tried to get him to do it, but he just wasn't interested and ended up sort of maybe turning him off it. Whereas I think with Alexander and James, it just sort of grew naturally. So I've sort of had that in my mind. I'm like, I don't make my kids go bird watching, but I try. I just talk about birds, and they obviously know I work with birds, and they see bird books sitting around my desk. And so my eldest daughter, she's got a better than passing knowledge of the birds that get out in the backyard and that sort of thing. My son, who's 6, seems to be getting quite into it. Like, he's got his own little bird book now that he sits and reads just by himself. I don't like say, Sam, study up your birds, there'll be a test and you'll get an ice cream if you get it right. I don't have to do that. And I've taken him bird watching once or twice, and he's always really enjoyed it and asked to go. So my youngest is still 4, so he's still, I think, he doesn't still know what he's quite interested in yet outside of Lego. But it'll be, but yeah, it's like I said, it's interesting. I don't want to force it on them, but I'll be very happy if they pick it up by osmosis.
Absolutely, yeah, and exposure, isn't it? Like the constant.
Yeah, I think, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's it. I think that's it.
And do you have any, in just to close that thought? I know a lot of listeners are birders that have kids as well. So do you have any thoughts or tips on how to do that, and how to encourage the passion for birds specifically, but also nature generally, without being too forceful?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's really just the way I've done it, and like I said, I've got a success rate of 50%. So it's to, it's, you just do what you do. Like when a wedge-tailed eagle flies past, say, oh look, there's a wedge-tailed eagle, and they'll have heard of wedge-tailed eagle. They'll know from they've read about eagles or something. Oh, that's cool, Dad. And when there's rainbow lorikeets outside and the grevilleas, say, look, kids, there's a rainbow lorikeet. And it's just that sort of thing. I think just pointing it out, and then till it becomes till they notice it themselves, and then they start pointing things out to you. Like, yesterday, like my daughter's like, Dad, there's that bird, there's that parrot out in the tree outside, the different one, the Rosella, I think it is. And you go out, no, it's the pale-headed Rosella. I live in Brisbane, so they're sort of they're a bit of a yard bird for us, but usually it's rainbow lorikeet. So things like that, they just notice that it becomes, like I said, it just they like I said, it's just by osmosis, I think, is the best way. I can't think of any other way, any other thing to do it. And of course, kids love looking through binoculars and telescopes and that sort of thing. So that's always binoculars is hard for kids, but if you've got a telescope, they love that because you can sit on a tripod, sit it there, and they can sort of hold their eye up to it and work out how it works, and the tawny frogmouth's not going to fly away, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's really good thoughts there. Because it can be tricky with those with those things, because you don't want to yeah, by being too forceful, they can be pushed off by it. But that's
Yeah.
really interesting. And
Sorry, one more thing I will add in there too, which the telescope made me thought of, is if you want to take kids birding, I've found that like a wetland is the best place to do it because of the telescope. So you can, things at wetlands tend to be a bit, you see more stuff. Whereas if you're in the bush and you have to use binoculars, it's nearly impossible. So that, or a place where O'Reilly's near Brisbane is a good one where the parrots come and land on them. Like they love that because the things are right there. But yeah, like I said, obviously you're not taking 6-year-olds on twitches to look for grass wrens or anything like that.
right, exactly. Yeah. Oh, brilliant. I mean, eventually, if it all works out and they get into it, then that's.
Yeah. No, for sure.
Thank you for listening to the Birding Today podcast. It's great to have you with us. If you're enjoying the show, don't hesitate to leave a positive review on whichever podcast app you're using at the moment. This really helps with getting the podcast up in search results and reaching more people. Thank you, and back to the show. So moving on chronologically through your birding journey, so you joined the Air Force. That's fascinating. Talk me through why you joined, maybe, and how that affected your birding journey, maybe.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I tried. So I joined straight out of school. So I always wanted to. Yeah, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a pilot. Actually, that was what I originally wanted to be, and joined the Air Force as a pilot. But without going a boring story, I sort of failed the training for that and ended up being an air traffic controller.
Yeah.
And so, whatever, that's fine. That was my job in the Air Force. And then, so I spent, so the first sort of 3 or 4 or 5 years of my time in the Air Force was just doing training, like doing university, doing my courses to learn how to be an air traffic controller. And then you get posted. So, and that was the best part for me. So I had, as a sort of, in my time at sort of university, I got to do a trip up to North Queensland just off my own bat. Drove up there, went on holidays, that sort of thing when I got a car. But then I got my first posting out of training was to Katherine in the Northern Territory. So and that ended up becoming the way birding sort of manifests itself through that, because you got posted somewhere completely different. I'd never lived before and got to go birding around. Got to see. Got to go to Kakadu and go birding, and it was just down the road from where I lived. And then I got posted to, I was not up there very long, and I got posted back to Newcastle on the east coast. But from there, got to go lots of exercises around the place. So and that was just really, it was just sort of it was almost like free travel, I suppose, to get around the place. And of course, when I got when you get posted somewhere, so I got posted to Katherine from a place called Sale down in Gippsland in Victoria. So. Yeah, okay, Nick, you've been posted. You got a week to drive up there. And it's like, all right, birding trip. So that's how it sort of, that's how that, like I said, it's enforced travel in a sense. So you just get to go to, you have to go through these places. So why not stop and do some birding on the way? And then got to do a little bit of international birding through that, just through like I said, deployments and that sort of thing. Not a whole heap, but there's certainly people that get to do more. But that was, like I said, that's just really what it was. It was just the way to travel.
Right. Yeah. The extended and increased mobility.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And then of course you have a bit of money as well because you got a job now, so you can, if you want to spend your holidays going on a birding trip, you can.
Yeah, fabulous. And you spent quite a while there, like 13 years. So that's
it was. So I did. My training sort of took about 5 years, and then I did about 8 years in the Air Force proper. And like I said, the first year and a bit of that was spent in Katherine. Then I spent the best part of 5 years down in Newcastle, and then I spent the last couple of years of my time in the United States, actually in San Diego. I did like it's called an exchange posting, where you go over there and they send one of their guys out to Australia for a period. So that was there. So that was my last posting.
Yeah,
which is great. Got to go birding around America, or to United States. So that was good too.
Amazing, and that's the thing about birding, isn't it? It's such an ideal hobby, and it's in a way it's such an easy hobby because you don't need much to go birding, and you can do it anywhere. Yeah.
You just need a bird book and a pair of binoculars. So and you're right.
Absolutely, and so after that, when we keep going along your path. Up until this moment, you became an international bird guide. How did that process go about, and how did you decide?
How did it happen?
Yeah.
It's again just one of those, like a lot of things that happen. It's just a bit of a coincidence. So I got out of the Air Force and I didn't really know what I was going to do. So, but my now wife and I, we traveled. So I got out of the Air Force from the States, and we spent about it was close to 8 months traveling around South America.
Oh, wow.
And because I joined the Air Force straight out of school, I'd never done that sort of independent, just wandering around travel before. Travel for me had always been you're going over here to do this job sort of thing. So that was good. And obviously, I did a bit of birding along the way. My wife's not a birder, so I couldn't just, it wasn't 8 months of birding, but every now and then I'd go, get a day off and, if we're near a nice national park or something. And it was something you're always doing along the way. But then we're in Ecuador, and there was this place called Ecuador that I'd heard about called Tandayapa Lodge. And it's in the sort of cloud forests just west of Quito. And I wanted to stay there. I was like, Jane, can you give me 2 days? I want to go and stay at this place. You'll find it boring, but they get 16 species of hummingbirds at the feeders and everything. So we booked it and we went off and we got picked up and went out there. And when we got there, we were unloading our bags. And this young actually it was Canadian fellow came and helped me with my bags. I'm like, mate, who are you? What do you do? And he's like, I'm just a volunteer here. I'm like, what do you mean a volunteer? He's like, what do you do? And he's like, well, I just sort of go birding every day and I help people when they're around. And I'm like, right. So how do I do this? And so anyway, so we stayed there for a couple of days, and then after that, and I taught, this fellow's name was Scott Watson, and so we just, it was awesome. Like, we were just sort of two young 20-somethings, and we just went birding for 2 days, basically. He was like my own personal guide because there's no other trips coming through the lodge at the time. And he said, I just emailed the owners and said, I want to volunteer. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. So I clearly, Jane, our trip's finishing in sort of August. Can I stay on for a couple of months if they say I can volunteer there? I thought, yeah, sure, go for it. So I emailed them and said, look, I'd really love to volunteer. Can you take it on? I know it's short notice. And they said, yes. So when our trip finished, Jane came home to keep doing some study, and I stayed on and went to Tandayapa and ended up there for, I think it was about 2.5 months.
Wow.
As it turned out, I thought that was going to be it. I thought I was just going to be there for 2 months. But as it turned out, one of the guys who owns the company that owns Tandayapa is an Australian fellow called Ian Campbell. And the company that he and his mates run is called Tropical Birding. And so Ian would come through the lodge occasionally, and obviously got to meet him. And after a couple of months, I think when you're volunteering at Tandayapa, you would go out. If there was no one around, you could just go birding for the day. But often when there was groups coming through, you'd help out. And if tours were coming through, you'd go along on the tour as like just sort of a dog's body. So I got, free birding trips around, sort of Western Ecuador. And after 2 months, I'd done a good job, I suppose. And he was like, Nick, is there any chance you want to do some guiding for us? Because we need someone to do some guiding in Australia. We've got a lot of tours coming up. Are you interested? And I was like, yeah, sure. And that's how it happened. It was just right place, right time. And within, I went home from Tandayapa it must have been like September, October, must have been September. And then by the end of October, I was guiding my first trip around Australia. So that was just how it happened. Just right place, right time.
Excellent. Oh wow, what a story! That's fabulous, because
you could do this too, Thomas.
Well, yeah. Well, one day, it's in the works. But I think it's really interesting to look back on all that, and what I'm also interested in is actually the guiding itself. Like, do you have any memories of the positives and the negatives? Because do you still do guiding now, or?
No, so I haven't done. So the problem, I don't want to put any of your younger listeners off guiding. The pay is not very good, and to work you have to be away. So unless you can do guiding from somewhere like, probably the only place you can, full-time guide without having to be away a lot would be, up around where you are, like North Queensland or something like that. So places that are birding destinations within Australia. Otherwise, where you would get enough people coming through to be able to make that worth your while. As an international guide, to be guiding, I have to be away from home, and that's great when you're young and have no attachments. And Jane and I were newly married. It wasn't a big encumbrance on our lifestyle. Didn't help the bank balance that much. But, you're still in that stage of life where you can afford to maybe do things that are just fun. But as soon as you start having families and that sort of stuff, then it becomes, and Jane's a professional, she has a full-time job, and looking at it, so you can't do things like, I could keep doing guiding if you got paid a lot more for it, perhaps, and that trade-off was okay, but I couldn't be away for 6 or more months of the year, on that sort of money, and still buy a house, have send your kids to school, do all those sorts of things. So that was the that's the.
And why are guides paid so little?
I don't know. Look, I just don't know. I guess it's not valued, I suppose. Like, and there'll always be people that will do it. So it's maybe one of those sorts of, so there'll always be someone that's willing to just do the fun job, that doesn't have the connections, that doesn't need to, I know some good friends that have been guides all their lives, and that's fine. They make that work with their family and that sort of thing. It's just different, different families. But like I said, I don't know why the pay is so low. Like I said, it's just how it is.
Yeah.
And like I said, I should say the pay is not low. I mean, you can make a very comfortable living being a guide, provided you're happy to be away a lot. And that's, like I said, it's just that balance, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. And making it work with your own situation in that specific scenario. And in terms of the guiding itself, I always like to discuss because I really get interested in this, because guiding. Oh, there's a plane passing by. Here we go. All right. Guiding itself is a social activity.
Yeah.
So, I guess what I'm getting at is how to manage the social dynamics of guiding a group. Because it's not all about the birds. It's about the people who are wanting to see them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No. It's really it can be hard to manage. I have to say, I was really lucky. So in the time that I went birding, I never had any like huge blow-ups in groups. It was because that's what it is. What you're sort of relying on with guiding is you're relying on people to be adults, and you rely, if you're guiding a group of half a dozen or 8 people, you're relying on the first person that sees the bird not to stand there in front of everyone on the trail and soak it up for a minute before saying, "Oh, would you like a look?" And so I was really lucky. I rarely had to actively manage that. I know maybe it was the Air Force in me, but before I'd run a trip, I'd sit around down and say, "Right, folks, this is how I expect things to run. Like, we all need to help each other. We all need to do this thing." And I mean, I don't know if that was, if that was needed, because I think most people just get that. But if you sort of lay your expectations early, prior planning, all that sort of stuff. So I was always pretty clear about that. But like I said, the truth is 95% of, 99% of people are completely reasonable. They understand that they're in a group. They understand that it's not just about them, and they'll be good. I had a few people that were not like that, but, and but it never, I was lucky it never led to any, complete breakdowns of the trip with, everyone hating each other and that sort of thing. I certainly had trips that were hard, and, like guiding in New Guinea is, that's one of the hardest places to guide. So I would have people that would get frustrated on birding trips, but I think they usually knew that it was not, it was rarely, well, sometimes it wasn't rarely, because of what I was doing, it was, their inadequacies, and they would accept that was sometimes why it was hard to, why the trip was not, going as they necessarily really wanted it to.
Well, Papua New Guinea, that brings us on to the next stage, because this is one of the questions that I had is how and why did you develop an interest in conservation biogeography? So that started in Papua New Guinea, right? Is that?
Yeah, it's sort of, I wouldn't say I developed an interest in it. It was like a lot of things. It's just, that was what the opportunity that presented itself. And so I find it really interesting. And New Guinea is one of the places to understand conservation biogeography. Why are some species where they are and not in other places, and that sort of thing. So, but it was, I'd run quite a few trips to New Guinea by this stage. And the University of Queensland actually was looking for someone to go and do some, as I think you said in your intro, like some capacity building stuff with some locals over there. And so, and just again through friend of a friend, they rang me up and said, "Hey Nick, you've been to New Guinea. We need someone to go that knows the birds. Are you interested?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So and it was just like I said, I was just lucky, right place, right time, and that ended up becoming this opportunity to initially that's where my PhD was going to be. It was going to be on stuff on New Guinea, and like I said, using on the back of another project that was going on over there, which is the one I've been asked to help out with.
Yeah.
So that got, and like I said, if you're interested in that sort of thing, conservation biogeography, New Guinea is the place to do it. Like you just have to look at how speciation occurs over there, and all the great work that's been done over there by birders past, like some of the most famous people in the world, like Jared Diamond and these sorts of guys who've done some amazing work on biogeography over there. So there's plenty to read. But anyway, sort of cut a long story short, I started on doing my PhD in Papua New Guinea in 2016, and within about a few months after I'd started, my supervisor, who was supervising my PhD then, James Watson, got involved, or got asked to sort of get involved in the Night Parrot stuff, which ended up becoming an opportunity to do that, to change my PhD onto that. And I got asked, and I had to think about it for about 0.1 second before I said, sure, I'll change and do Night Parrots. So like I said, the interesting conservation biogeography, which became what the Night Parrot, the Night Parrot PhD became quite a lot about that as well. But like I said, it wasn't any interest I developed before. It was an interest that's come since, like I said, since the project sort of presented itself.
Right, and it's always underlying, as birders, where it's sort of a foundation of birding, conservation and biogeography. It's like that's
100%. Why are things where they are? Why is something that's threatened? Why is it still here and not where it used to be? Like that's all. It's all wrapped up in that sort of stuff.
It's so interesting, and to track that. And so let's dig into your specific work on the Night Parrot. So what did your PhD involve specifically?
Yeah, so I suppose to set up my PhD, it's important to know what had happened before. So they'd been rediscovered by John Young on what is now Pullen Reserve in sort of 2013. And so for a year or two, or for about 2 years, John and a fellow called Steve Murphy, Dr. Steve Murphy, worked together on the project up until about 2014, and then John didn't work on it so much after that, and Steve went through to about 2016. And so by 2016 he'd been working on it for about, like I said, about 3 years. And it's hard graft, the work out there. It's pretty tough. Steve had been doing lots of time in the field, and he'd been funded by an offset from it was a Fortescue Metals offset to do with some condition from their Fortescue mine over in the Pilbara. And so that money was sort of coming to an end. So Steve had to, first of all, he sort of had enough of the project, and his funding was running out. So typically what you do in that situation would be handed over to a university. And that's where James came in. So Steve and James had a connection, and that's, like I said, so that's how I ended up coming onto the project. Initially, what I was going to do turned out it was quite different. So Steve had done a first round of tracking. So he caught a couple of birds, put little tags on them, and tracked where they went. And that revealed some, still, in the 10 years that we've been studying night parrots now, the biggest jump in our understanding of the species was a result of that tracking that Steve did in 2015, 2016.
Wow.
So initially we wanted to do that again. And at that time, the birds were discovered by Nige Jacket, Bruce Greatwich, Adrian Boyle and George Swan over in Western Australia, in sort of central Western Australia. And so some people, I had been connected obviously with the Night Parrot recovery team who knew about that, and that became an effort to try and track a bird in Western Australia to see, to sort of try and do a bit of comparative ecology, I suppose. And that, so we went over there, we caught the bird, put the tag on it, never saw it again. It flew away and disappeared. So that put the sort of, because that happened, it was, at that stage, like a 2 out of 3 success rate for tracking and getting data back was, that was pretty good. But with the population of night parrots, and this is something probably people don't, maybe people don't understand. I say it often, but if you haven't heard it, the population of night parrots on Pullen or in Western Queensland was never known to be any more than about sort of half a dozen birds. And in fact, for the first year, or I think it was even for about the first year or two, the population was only ever sort of 2, 3, maybe 4 birds. So that was known about. So that's, so you're talking about a really small number of birds, and losing one of those birds if tracking went wrong. We decided that, we've done well with the tracking that Steve had done. We don't need to risk it. The information, the extra information we're likely to get probably is not outweighed by the risk of perhaps losing, 25% of population if it doesn't go right, as it didn't in Western Australia.
Right.
So that was tough for me because at that point I'm sort of a year and a half into my thesis, and it was supposed to be about tracking birds, and that's sort of taken away from me. So I then had to sort of quick. Oh, sorry, you go, Tom.
Well, just while you're on it, the tracking, I'm interested in that. How do you collect the data from that process? Like, is it? It's not satellite, is it? Is it GPS?
No. So look, we can do a deep dive into this, and maybe your listeners might find it boring, but I find it fascinating. So I think it's like a lot of things in life. When you actually get down into the detail, you're like, it sort of opens your eyes like, oh, actually, is that how this works? I thought it was like this, So images of, just catching a bird, put a little backpack on it and it flying around for weeks and getting, knowing where it is the whole time. You're like, that's not how it works. It's not how it works at all. So the first bird that Steve tracked, he only put a little radio transmitter on it. So, and that's the one you would have seen, people would know about, would have seen sort of video of people holding up an aerial and doing this, and it goes, beep, 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 and okay, well, it's in that direction. And the idea to start with was that, okay, we'll put a radio transmitter on. At that stage, they didn't know, they knew that they roosted in these sort of consistently roosted in these same sort of, hectare or two of spinifex, but they didn't know if at night did they leave, did they stay there the whole night and just run around the ground eating spinifex. No one knew. So that's what the question I'm trying to answer was. So put this little radio transmitter on, and what they realized was the bird was leaving, but then they couldn't find it again, and they would walk. They spent nights wandering around trying to find this thing, getting no returns on the radio. So they didn't know initially whether it had fallen off or whether it had, the bird had just flown. Maybe it had gone 50 kilometers away, and they were never going to find it again. So for this to work, you have to be relatively close to the bird, to get even just a bit of a signal. So they, after about I think it was about a week, they ended up just randomly driving along with the thing out the window and, oh shit, we've got it, it's here. And so they then found it again, but again it left that spot, and at night they couldn't find it. So the best they got was that it was flying over them at some point in a sort of a northerly direction, from the area where it was roosting.
Wow.
So they knew it must have been traveling some distance at night. They had no idea which direction it was going or where it was going. So the reason they'd gone with that tag, the radio tag, is very light. So a night parrot weighs about 100 grams. And there's a bit of, not debate, I wouldn't say, but the weight of a tag that you can put on a bird is limited as a percentage of its body weight. And a good weight is, sort of around 3%. Some people, some birds can take a tag that's up to 5% of their body weight, but you don't want to go too heavy and you start to restrict the bird too much. Like imagine, walking around with sort of, having to carry a 5-kilo weight everywhere with you. So so the radio tag was really light. Wanting to do it again and try and get more information, Steve decided to go with a GPS tag, which is a little bit heavier. It was going to be about 2.9 grams. So I was going to be up around about that 3% body weight. I think maybe it was about 2 grams. So I can't remember the exact numbers right now. But the thing with the GPS tag was you had to program it. So what would happen is it would turn as you've got your handheld GPS, you turn it on. It's got you wait sort of 20 seconds for it to get a fix.
Yeah.
And so what would happen is you put the tag on the bird, the GPS turns on, gets a fix, closes down. Then you could program it so that I want to fix now, I want to fix in 10 minutes time, I want to fix in another 10 minutes. And the way the tag worked is it would do, you have hot and cold fixes with a GPS. So if you turn it on after it's been off for a while, it has to find satellites, update its timing, all that sort of stuff. And that takes some time. So with the GPS tag on the bird, I think I've got this right. After every 2 hours, it would have to do a cold fix. But if you had a fix within a 2 hour period, it would do a hot fix. So a hot fix would take a couple of seconds. A cold fix might take up to 20 seconds. So there's the maths of the fixes you can get. And then there's the kicker, the battery, the thing is so small, the battery that it has only has about, it's like 600 seconds of life in this battery. So you can only get, if every fix takes a few seconds, you can only get a maximum worked out of about 150 fixes if you program them in a certain way.
Okay, yeah.
So Steve came up with a program that did that, caught the bird, tagged it, released it, let it do its business for about 5 days, which is how long they got fixes. It was about 20 fixes a night or 20 or 30 fixes a night for 5 nights. The batteries run out, then you have to recatch the bird because you have to get the tag back because you have to download the data off the tag.
Oh, it doesn't go to the. It doesn't. It
no,
can't
so
go anywhere.
it's so small. It's so small, and it's got this battery. Someone once asked me, I won't say who it was, like, why don't you put a solar tag on it? Because it's a night parrot, man. Anyway. We have, so Chris McCall is in our lab who does work on red goshawks. His birds have these huge tags with solar panels. They upload to the satellite. He catches the bird, puts it on, goes back to his home and just watches the data drip into his computer every day for 3 years, But with the night parrot, that's not how it worked. So that worked, and then Steve had to recatch the bird, and to know where the bird is to recatch it, as well as the GPS tag, it has one of those little radio transmitters, like I talked about with the
Yeah.
So they refound the bird, they recaught it, got the tag, downloaded it, and the tag had worked to if it had worked like 9.8 out of 10. It was amazing. Like they got about, I think it was about 130 points. We can read the paper on it. Steve wrote a paper with all this data in it. Got about 130, 140 points over 5 nights, and it was eye-opening because it showed us where this bird was moving. It was coming back to the same place to roost. It was flying 8Ks in that direction to visit this area to feed night after night. So I was clearly targeting this area to go that was a long way away. It was flying, 10Ks in the opposite direction to go and get a drink from a farm dam.
Wow.
So when I talk about I talked before about that being the single biggest jump we made in our understanding of night parrots, this is why, because we're then able to say, okay, so what the thing to come out of that was that, okay, they need this long unburnt triodia for roosting, where we can find them consistently every day, every dusk. This is where they wake up. They fly out, and they need to be able to access to these high. What it turned out was this bird was visiting was basically floodplains. So out there in the sort of arid area, in the arid zone, you have these sort of bit shallower than the rest of the landscape. You have a big river running by, the Diamantina River, and when it floods, these areas, get inundated. Then the water comes down, and bang, you get this growth of like annual grasses and lots of herbs and forbs, that sort of thing. And it was targeting these areas where that happens, because most of the country out there is pretty barren, like it's the arid zone. That's how it is. So this bird, it was clear from this tracking data that it was targeting these areas. So then you go, okay, well, what we now know is we don't need to look for just long unburnt spinifex.
Right.
We need to look for long unburnt spinifex in proximity to floodplains and that sort of thing. And like I said, that was the single biggest, step change in our understanding of the bird and where to look for it, how to find it.
Right.
And that's what's happened over in Western Australia. We've been able to put that in practice and find more.
Oh, so you have found more in
so there's more
using that knowledge.
Using that knowledge. And so that was, I suppose this is a really long way of answering the question about what I did, but that tracking had been done, and that's why we wanted to do more of it. And even though we got that information from it, like I said, the tracking, it's risky because Steve did really well, but those tags, you only have to have that tag only has to stuff up once and go for 2 cold fixes, and bang, you've used up you used up that 600 seconds of battery life for 4 data points or something instead of the 140 that he got. And that happening is completely feasible. That's not out of the question. These things don't work perfectly every time. It worked perfectly for the one Steve caught, but that's always a risk. So we decided not to do the tracking, but there was definitely work that needed to be done on the acoustic side of things and working out how to detect night parrots.
Yeah.
that's the road I ended up going down. So we knew that these things called song meters, or automated recording units, which are these digital sort of recorders about the size of a small brick or something. You put them out, and we knew that you could put them out near where the night parrots were roosting. They would call. They have these really predictable dusk and dawn calling periods, and you would pick them up on these things. You could analyze the data. You knew they were coming back to these sites regularly, night after night after night, sort of thing, to roost in the same area, a few hectares.
Yeah.
So I ended up going down the road of like, okay, what do these things sound like? We collect so much data, we need to write, computer sort of software that can automatically pull out the calls.
Yeah.
Once we do that, how far can we detect a night parrot using this technique? So what I developed basically was a way of surveying for night parrots using acoustics, using these automated recording units. So when you combine that knowledge of how to search for the birds, which was like I said, the work I did, with the knowledge of Steve, which is, these are the landscapes you're likely to find them in. That's now being put into practice, like I said, in Queensland, but particularly in Western Australia. And that's how we're finding more birds, using a combination of those two research outcomes.
And so what's the current status of that work? Like, of course, there's still so much that we don't know about them.
Yeah.
It's
For sure. So I suppose there's two sort of things. There's sort of two streams sort of going at the moment. So the searching for them, that's still occurring. So the work that I did on Bush Heritage's Pullen Reserve in Queensland, that's been sort of, we're doing some work training up. So in Western Australia, a lot of the areas where night parrots are likely to be found is on Indigenous managed land. So it's about training up sort of the Indigenous ranger groups in how to search for night parrots, and telling them, like I said, telling them that stuff that we learned at Pullen, like, this is the sort of habitat you're likely to find them in. This is how you set up a song meter. This is, these are the tools you need to go and look for them. Now, your country. So where are these sites on your country? And they go, oh, yeah, no, there's some down here, there's some over there. So then they go put out the recorders, and it's working really well. Like I said, there's at least 3-4 groups now of Indigenous rangers that have found night parrots on their IPAs. But over there, we're still in the looking for them stage, looking to transition, I suppose, to management. But on Pullen, that's where we're really at now. So we've done this sort of research phase, has gone for several years now. What we're looking to do is to put that research into practice and manage the birds. And so my role with Bush Heritage is around that, doing that on Pullen Reserve, and doing it in like an adaptive management framework. I don't want to bore your listeners with that sort of getting too much into the details, but the idea that you don't just you've got to work out how you're going to manage them. You got to work out whether that management is effective at doing the things you want it to do.
Yeah.
And then is that resulting in an increase in the night parrot population? So at Pullen, we're really in that management sort of stage of things. In, like I said, in other places, we're still looking to transition to that management side of things.
Yeah, it's such important work. And when we zoom back in onto the bird and its ecology, what is it that makes the night parrot so elusive?
Look, I suppose you have to define what you're talking about there. So they are elusive, but they're also really rare.
Right.
Occur at really low density. Historically, they weren't at such. Historically, I think you could even probably say the night parrot was fairly common.
Wow.
Some of the historical reports we know of suggest that this was not a bird that was hard to find. So, there's a report from the mid 1890s of some fellas on an expedition up through Central Australia, dropping in at the Alice Springs telegraph station. And the postmaster had a picture on his wall with 4 night parrot wings hanging on it. And the guy who was the ornithologist on the expedition is like, mate, where do these come from? These are night parrots. And he's like, yeah, mate, the cat brings them in all the time.
Wow.
So this says to us, if a cat could bring in, several night parrots, presumably they were relatively common in the landscape. Andrews, the guy who collected, I think it's about 23 of the known 29 specimens, collected all 23 of them in about a 3-year period.
Wow.
In like the late 1860s, 1870s in the Gawler Ranges. So they must have been relatively common there. And the people who knew them historically from, like the Northeast and South Australia, used to say that, it was an unusual thing to come across them. So at some point in the landscape, they're common. They're obviously not common now, and that's for a few reasons. So, fire and introduced predators, cats are the two main threats. So fire burns the triodia, which seems to be their most important, really important resource for them, because it's where that protects them. It's where they roost during the day, stay out of trouble. It's what they nest in. And then I think the real problem with cats is it comes around breeding time, because we know that when night parrots breed, they breed quite frequently. They're quite fecund. They have, they'll make lots of attempts at breeding when conditions are good. What seems to happen is the young get out of the nest in which they're well protected, because it's in the middle of a spinifex clump. They get out and spend, it seems like, a couple of weeks just flopping around on the ground, like all young parrots, going like, feed me.
Yeah.
They can't fly really. They can't get away from anything, and they're just, it's just like, the cats just, I think they just smash all the young ones in that 2-week period. So breeding for them is a really difficult thing to do. So that's why they've declined. Why are they elusive? I mean, that's sort of that's just to do with their habits, So they, they're very hard to flush. So we don't deliberately try and flush them. That's, obviously that's, ethically and the wrong thing to do. We do have for a period in my research, we're trying to work out, wanted to learn more about breeding, how often I'm breeding, that sort of stuff. And to do that, we'd have to search for nests. So to search for nests, you have to get in and around where they are, and there's a risk of flushing them. So our ethics permit was written in this way, that we would only do this in the sort of the last hour of the day, so that if you flushed a bird, it would, they would flush, they'd hide under a bit of spinifex, they'd only be there for half an hour, and then they could, get back to normal business, instead of trying to flush birds in the morning, where they then have to spend a whole day sort of out away from the protection of their home. So I want to, because I want to stress to everyone that this is all done with, a lot of forethought about how the impacts on the bird. But even when you're doing this, even when you're walking around at sunset, a bird would often not flush until sometimes you would brush against the hummock that it was in before it would pop out. So the idea that you would see this thing just walking around through the spinifex, when there's, thousands of hectares of potential roosting habitat, the idea that you can find them that way is, you just can't. So in that sense, they're elusive. But then they also have this, the funny thing is, this calling behavior is really predictable. So it happens about, like I said, about half an hour after sunset for about a 5-minute, depends if they're breeding or not. If they're not breeding, it's often just a handful of calls. And then the same thing at dawn when they come back in. But that's the sort of time when most sensible bird watchers are, getting the fire going and, starting to think about dinner and that sort of thing. So I think a lot of the methods for searching probably just didn't account for this particular behavior. So like I said, they're very detectable, if that makes sense. But they're detectable if they're there. It's just that, but they occur at very low density. So getting to somewhere where they are is very difficult.
Yeah, amazing. Oh, we could go on for hours. It's brilliant. Just I want to look back on the historical aspect of the night parrot, because it's somewhat paradoxical, because they live in these very, very remote places that to a human eye it looks the same as it would have done 1,000 years ago. So in that sense, the habitat hasn't changed, and the same with fire. Fire's been around forever. So I just want to get that clear, because those two things haven't changed really, have they? So it's mostly the mammals, the introduced mammals, is it?
No. So it's two things there. So the first one, the mammals one is easy. So cats are everywhere now. They, and like you say, there might be no apparent, difference to us, to the landscape. The difference is there's cats in it, which weren't there 200 years ago. So that's and the impact of cats on small mammals. So that the best way to think of a night parrot is ecologically it's like a small mammal. It comes out, it spends all its time on the ground. It's a seed eater. It's small. It's about 100 grams. It can fly, but it only flies to get to the next place where it's going to land on the ground and start feeding. So they are effectively they're like a ground dwelling mammal in a lot of senses, which is why they're vulnerable to cats. So that's I think that answers the mammal party question. The fire thing's more complex. So the difference between fire regimes now and 200 years ago is that 200 years ago it was managed entirely by the indigenous people who lived on the land, and for them fire was it was a daily thing. So they're walking around setting fire because the succession of I should say that there's people that know a lot more about this than me. I'm giving you this is literally the cream on the top. So there's people, guys like guys like Steve Murphy, and there's people who this is they've spent lifetimes researching this stuff. So I'm giving you like I said, the easy answer. It's far more complex, but more or less, fire was a constant part of the landscape. It needed to be because the succession after fire was important for producing different food. So people on the indigenous people knew that a year after fire, this sort of plant will come up. 3 years after fire, this sort of plant will come up. Between 3 and 10 years after fire, there was nothing. So, but 10 years of fire, there was this thing that came up. So they're always trying to keep a succession of ages going, and they did that by breaking it up so that when you had a fire in one place, because it was broken up by this patchy sort of fire history, the fire couldn't spread. What happened was when, as indigenous people came off the land and were removed from the land in some places forcibly, in some places it was just a function of what happened. The fire wasn't in the landscape anymore, and so what happened is the load built up, and then so it was continuous. And so then when a fire lit in one part, instead of burning for a bit and hitting a barrier that was created by the patchy fire history, that barrier wasn't there anymore, so it would just keep burning. So you can go back to, and this is something that's really important to understand with night parrots, is you can go to an area of suitable habitat, of habitat that looks suitable now, but you actually have to think about the history of that habitat for 100 years previously. And if all the spinifex in an area burnt out, 50 years ago, if everywhere got burnt 50 years ago, there might be some old spinifex there now, but because all the night parrots got wiped out 50 years ago, there's nowhere for them to come back in from. So you have, like I said, you have what looks to you like suitable habitat, but there's not going to be night parrots because of the previous, the history of the previous sort of 50, 100 years. So, like I said, that's a very basic explanation of how fires affected the landscape. But the important thing with the work we're doing with the Indigenous rangers in Western Australia, it's about that. It's about getting these traditional, right way fire regimes, just getting them back into country and re-establishing those sorts of, managing a fire in the same way that it has been for thousands of years, because that's what these species need. They need that heterogeneity of fire classes, of age classes of the vegetation.
Yeah,
does that make any sense?
It's absolutely, it really is fascinating, and yeah, we could keep going, but let's maybe leapfrog from the night parrot over to some other species that you know about and have worked on. And as a way to get to those species, we could talk about the buff-breasted button quail. And to start that off, this is something I'm really interested in, is why are some species rare and others aren't? For example, the painted button quail and the buff-breasted button quail, genetically almost identical, the same, superficially. So what makes a species rare? Because and ecologically they're similar too. So this is something I've been thinking about leading up to talking with you, Nick, because I'm interested in your thoughts in that. What makes a species rare?
Yeah, it comes back to that. I guess it all comes back to biogeography in a sense. And I suppose you have to define rarity. I mean, so there's different ways you can define rarity. So rarity initially, I think the guy who did a lot of this work was a fellow called Ronkai, and he was a plant guy. And he defined rarity as like a relative abundance thing. So if, things that are just less common within the landscape, that's rare. Okay, that's fine. We can live with that. Then it was sort of extended to like, well, okay, what if something's range restricted? Does that make it rare? What if it's relatively common in that little area, but it's only found in this one area? Is that rare? And it is rare. If at a landscape scale it's rare. At a micro scale, perhaps it's not rare.
Right.
Some people think about rarity in terms of like detectability, and
Yeah.
I've problems with that, because that's something might not be rare, it just might be hard to find. The classic example of that is the marsupial moles, which were considered for a long time to be very rare. They're hardly ever seen, but then they just worked out how to look for them and realized actually these things are everywhere. Under the desert, under the sand in the desert, there's heaps of them. They're all over the place, but we just didn't know how to find them. So that's why I have a problem with a definition of rarity based on detectability. So then to take it back, so what really I suppose you have to think about is what's the sort of status of something relative to what it would be normally. And that's so that's difficult. So night parrots are rare now, or are threatened, because there used to be lots and now there's not very many. Buffies used to be relatively common, buff-breasted button quail. So, up around Cohen, they were in the 1922. They collected the bloke's name escaped me. McLennan. Pat Webster will kill me if I forgot that. So McLennan, who collected collected them relatively easily. He encountered them fairly frequently around Cohen in 1920. So they weren't rare. They were just range restricted. Why are they range restricted? That's to understand that you have to go back thousands of years and look at how their evolution, that sort of thing. So they're similar in a lot of respects to a chestnut-backed button quail. In fact, at one time the two were thought to be the same species, race of the same species. They were subsequently split. But why? What makes painted button quail different? I don't know. It's just a question I can't answer. It seems to be something to do with some maybe plasticity, or maybe just how general. So painted button quail are pretty. They can get by in a lot of different habitats. Obviously, a wide variety of climatic conditions. They extend from, we know now, thanks to Pat's work, Cape York all the way down to southern Australia and right across to Western Australia. So they're widespread. So they can they can handle low conditions. Buffies have only ever been up on Cape York, so there's something there. We don't know what it is, why that is, but it's just how it is for that species. So I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if I'm doing a very good job of answering your question, but to say I don't know why the painted seems to be more successful in a range sense than Buffy. It's I said there's all these things play into it.
Yeah, no, it's all really helpful and really interesting, and the reason it's perplexing is that they're so similar. It's do you know what I mean?
Again, it's similar it's similar in an outward sense. But when you drill down into these things, it might be that perhaps painted button quail is a much more general diet than Buffy. That might be, or there's some physiological reason why the painted button quail is able to exist across a wider range of conditions than Buffy. That's stuff we just don't know, and we can't know until we sort of find them and can study them a bit, I suppose, and work that out.
It's this driving factor that we all have as birders, and maybe if we zoom out now a little bit and take it on a more general level, I could ask you, and this links back to the joy of birding, right? I could ask you, what drives you to study these rare and threatened birds? Is there psychologically speaking, even when you go out birding for leisure, you still go out and we have this target in mind because we orient ourselves to get a goal and to find the bird. So I don't know, I just find the psychology of it very interesting as well.
It's interesting. So with the way we sort of decide within our group, the way we sort of pick the birds that we would like to study is we sort of try and choose these species that don't have that we need to learn a lot about, that we need to learn about. So there's species that are threatened, like, and some that come to mind are things like regent honeyeater, I suppose. And thanks to the great work of the guys down at ANU, like, we actually now know quite a bit about swift parrot, orange-bellied parrot, so these birds which are super threatened. And through research, we've learned about them and learned how to, we've learned what we need to do to conserve them. So we're just doing that same thing, but with birds that we've identified need that work. So Buffy's was an obvious one. It was threatened, but we really, actually, we know almost nothing about it. Carpentarian grass wren, another one. Like, we sort of have a basic understanding of what the threatening processes are, but do we really understand how that's affecting this species, and can we put that into practice with management? So what we try to do in our lab is, like I said, identify those species that have the knowledge gaps, fill those knowledge gaps, but really importantly, try and link that to what do you then need to do to lead to recovery. Sometimes that's really easy, in the case of, when I say easy, sometimes that link becomes quite clear, like with carpentarian grass wren, it's about fire management, that sort of thing. For a species like red goshawk, it's not as clear, because what we're finding out about that species is, it's wide, it's not sedentary. It's, these birds are covering, huge areas, so multiple tenures. So actually conserving the red goshawk is a bit of a head scratcher. Like, it's a real problem. Like, how do we do it? How do we get so many people to come together to agree on, to do the things needed to conserve this bird? Night parrot, like I said, night parrot, they probably sit somewhere in the middle. It occurs across a wide area, but actually we sort of have a pretty good idea of what we need to do to conserve it. We just need, to manage it. We just need to get that doing. So, like I said, in our group, that's our sort of focus. The birds that attract us are the ones that, like I said, the ones we don't know much about, that we like to, that we know, identify those knowledge gaps and try and fill them.
Yeah. The red goshawk, what a bird! I'd love to see one of those.
Have you not seen one?
No, never. Red goshawk.
Get on to Chris McCall. He'll go and volunteer for him on some of his field work up your way.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, well, we'll have to connect about that, because it's a big target.
They're a cracker.
Yeah, amazing. And also, yeah, it's interesting as well to have the documentation for all these birds, because I believe, as a side note, I believe the only bird species that has not been photographed is the Buffy, right?
Yeah, there's no known undisputed photograph of a buff-breasted buckwhale. Yeah, right. That's true. There's a photo of a nest with eggs in it, but from 1922, but there's no photo of a live bird.
It's absolutely it's just that, so these birds are so mysterious. And looping back to the night parrot again, the habitats are so vast and remote, and you can spend weeks out there. It's just it's beautiful. I'm quite romantic in the classical sense, and I love that aspect of birding.
Oh, for sure. The idea that it's like so many things. When you get deep into it, you realize how much you don't know.
Yeah, that's right. Sure. That's right. And so we still have a few questions to cover, if you're happy to keep going.
No, as long as everyone hasn't turned off by now, let's keep going.
So what do you think makes a good birder?
Look, it's a good question. I suppose it's sort of, in my opinion of this, changes over time. When you're young, you think it's about knowing what things are. So, and that is a very important component of being a good birder. Then then you get into that sort of, anyone who's been on a pelagic knows, that sort of competition to say what the thing is when it's the furthest away from the boat, like that's but that's, in my view, that's just a small part of being a good birder. Like, so you need to know what you're seeing, but you also need to know, in my opinion, the best birders are the people that can find birds. And to find birds, you need, and when I say finding birds, I mean, there's a saying, birders are more sight faithful than birds. Like, how many people, the number of people who, going back to red goshawk, how many people in Australia that have red goshawk on their list ticked it at a known nesting site? Like, for a lot of birders, that's what we do. We just go to, if I want to see this bird, I go to this spot. If I want to see this bird, I go to that spot. For me, the best birders are the people that get out and find things, and they learn about a bird, they learn what habitat it is, they learn its habits, and then when they get into that habitat, they also have the knowledge of how to identify something, and they can see that, oh, that thing I'm seeing there, that's different to what I usually see. It's, so it's a combination of all those things, I think, which make it a good birder. The best birder is not the person who can identify the thing the most quickly. It's not the person who can take you to the most spots where other people have seen something. It's the people that, know, like I said, understand their, where to find things and how to identify them in that, in a novel context of those. When you think about the good birders, like I had a mate of mine was a keen birder in the UK, and he said in the UK, he said this, I've never checked it with anyone, but yeah, you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong. There's this sort of a bit of a competition around, you have your list, and this is the number of this birds, but you have a list that's called your self-found list. So to get to your self-found list only includes rarities that you found. You can't get it. Your self-found list can't include something that someone else found and said it's over here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in my eyes, the people that would be the best birders would be the people that have that have a really good self-found list. And to tie that into like a local context, something that's becoming more popular, I think, is like local birding. Like getting your in Australia, we use these LGA lists, like your local government area. In America, it's your county list. And the people that have a really big local area list is the people that, I respect those people because they get to know an area.
Yeah.
And so if I was going to go birding in an area, I'd want to go birding with someone who had the best, LGA list, because they're the people that know the area. They know what's different. They know the birds that are there. They understand how to identify and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd. I don't know. It's a bit of a rambling answer to your question, but I was going to define good birding, those are the things I'd consider.
Yeah, it wasn't a rambling answer at all. Make perfect sense to me, and I think the self-found thing. That's actually the first time I hear that. Self-found, yeah. It's and you would get a lot of joy, wouldn't you, if you self-find a bird.
100%.
And there was something else I wanted to touch on there. Yeah. So I interviewed R. Bruce Richardson way back, and something that he said stuck with me, which is he's a performer, he's a musician, and so he referred to, stage time.
Yeah.
Spending as much time as you can in the environment of the birds, and and that has a cumulative effect or an exponential effect on your knowledge, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The more time you spend out there, the more stage time you have birding. That's when you can grow exponentially as a birder, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And that's when, the more, as you say, the more stage time you have, that's when you become the birder that's, walk along a track and go, this thing should be here. And you look around and it's there, and no one told you it was going to be there, but you realized, like I said, off the back of your experience that, I should be able to find this here. And, again, to tie it back, I suppose, to guiding, that's what the best bird guides can do. Guiding can be just a race around to the spots where you're going to see things, but the really good guides can be like, we've missed this thing, but, they should be in this spot here because there's, this sort of tree, or that, it's this sort of habitat, and that should be, I should be able to find them there. And like I said, they're the best birders.
Yeah, that's right. And it takes knowledge of not only the birds but their habitats and more general things, and even the weather.
For sure, the weather. Yeah. And again, I suppose I don't want to. I'm not trying to poo-poo the people that that know exactly what something is because the fourth tertial is 2 millimeters longer than the all that sort of stuff like that. That knowledge is super important too. But you have to have both to be considered a really good birder.
You mentioned LGAs before. What are your thoughts on eBird? Do you use eBird?
It's funny. It's a topical question. So we had a wet weekend here in Brisbane, and I spent a couple of hours actually putting like some really old lists into eBird because I want to know what my life list is. I don't know what it is, and because I got a lifer just the other week, I'm like, I should put it in. I don't even know what my life list is. So eBird is great for that, and eBird is great. I think. Look. The idea that it connects people to birding, that it gives people, eBird has got me out birding. So this year, for the last, I've been head down to my PhD for the last sort of 6-7 years. If I'd go birding, I'd be like, I'll just go to I just go down the road to the same place every time. And it's like, no, Nick, I need something and a reason to get out and do something. So I thought this year, 22, I want to see 400 birds. And I just plucked that number out of my bum. I didn't know. I didn't know whether I could do it or not. I just wanted to something that would make me go to different places. And I'm going to eBird them all, and so that's how I'm going to keep track of it. So eBirding, it has a place for that sort of thing, and I think it's really valuable. Some of the big data questions that you can answer with eBird are really, really important. It does have some shortcomings, and we see this in our work dealing with rare, potentially difficult to identify species. There's eBird obviously has a moderation sort of protocol and that sort of thing, which is great. But given the amount of data that comes in and the way the data comes in, it's really difficult to for that to be that's just hard work. So, and I think they do a great job, but I think there are times when eBird data has to be used carefully, and the conclusions you draw from it need to be, you need to do that carefully. But I mean, look, that goes for any database, any way of getting information. There's always going to be pros and cons, and I think largely with eBird the pros massively outweigh the cons. But like I said, for people using it for particular things, you just have to be careful with it.
Right. It's been great to do this podcast because I now have quite a big back catalogue of episodes, and I'm remembering now when I spoke to Michael Gooch, he mentioned something really interesting and I think relevant, is the saturation of data in eBird. Because everyone ends up going to the same place, and it sort of skews the data in a really misleading way.
So we just dealt with this exact problem with a paper that Chris McColl led on red goshawk. So, trying to pull together all the records, and if you just plotted a number of records, you have this huge spike of records over time. You're like, oh, what's that mean? But then, of course, as soon as you drill down into it, they're all from one or two nests. All that data came from. Like you'd get 50 records of this one bird in a nest. So if you just skate over the top of the data, you don't realize that we had to develop a bespoke method for dealing with that clustering of records to be able to use that eBird data in a more, to look at a more, like I said, a more wide-ranging view of red goshawk distribution and status because of that exact problem which you mentioned.
Yeah. All really interesting stuff. So let's
but the fact that the data is there is hugely important in the first place. Okay. So there is data saturation, but the fact that we've got the data and we can deal with the problems afterwards.
Yeah. And I guess another aspect to that, now that you said that, is the quality of the data coming in. Because the fact that anyone can and does submit an eBird list means that you have a very, diverse pool of skill sets of contributors. So is that a problem as well, do you think? But I mean, you mentioned the moderators as well, so that's a barrier to that too. But
the moderator is a barrier to it. But a good example might be someone who goes to if a good, what we were talking before about what makes a good birder. A good birder goes to a site and puts a list in and gets 30 species. A novice birder or someone who's just a casual birder goes to the same site and gets 20 species. What does that over time, does that all shake out? Like it depends what you're using the data for. And this, I think, I think you can overstate the problem perhaps. The people that work with eBird data, as we do, as I know lots of other people do, we know these problems. We're aware of these problems with the data, and we work out ways to get around it. Like I said, I think more important is that we have the data to start with. We can do we can deal with the other stuff. That's just all statistics, just dealing with the sort of discrepancies and that sort of thing. And as long as you're careful with it, like I said, you're not at risk of making. The risk is when you make conclusions that are not supported because the data is poor. And that's, like I said, that's just why you have to be careful about the conclusions that you make.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah. In that regard of data and research and working on birds, do you have a two-part question, any birding tips for young or new birders who are just starting out? And also on the flip side, if there's any conservation students or people who'd like to go into studying conservation,
Mm.
Any quick tips or thoughts on how to endure in that field?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose the first one for bird, look, and I'd say this is not a tip for novice birders. This is something that I'm still learning, is to be, you know, to be circumspect, when it comes to birding. Like I said, going back to the pelagic show, it's always great to be the first person that says, "Oh, it's a this," but you always look like a goose when it's not that. And it's the same thing. I'm seeing this at the moment with my night parrot research. So we've been, these conclusions we've drawn around night parrots, and their habits and that sort of thing. It's like, yeah, this is how it is, because this is what I'm seeing. But I've just come back from a trip to Western Australia where I spent a week out on the Nurrupa IPA with the Nurrupa Rangers looking for night parrots. And some of the things that are happening over there, they don't necessarily jive with our, with the picture of night parrot sort of ecology and occupancy that we have from Queensland. And that's not to say that my sort of view of it is wrong. It's just to say that it's, there's what's the word? There's details there that we're still to work through. So you've just got to be. So don't be, with birding and with bird conservation, don't be declaratory. Always have in the back of your mind that you might be wrong and that you might not be right. And that's the thing. I mean, I was like that when I was a young birder. I'm like, I know what this is. It's this. And no one's going to tell me that I didn't see it. And I know now that, actually, Nick, you should have just been a bit more. There's nothing wrong with being circumspect. You can only lose your credibility once, sort of thing.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I tend to fall off the horse on the other side, which is
yeah,
like thinking it over and say, "Oh, is that what it really was?" I can't. Oh, yeah. And you don't want to commit to,
yeah,
to IDing it. You know what I mean?
yeah. No. But look, both the error in both directions can have impacts. We wrote a paper at this our lab about being overconfident can make you think things are where they're not. Being underconfident can lead you to believing things aren't there when they are.
Right.
These are just different sides of error. So you've got to find that happy medium. But like I said, I'd say as a birder trying to set out to start with, I think there's always that you can come up. There's more downside to being the the know-all than there is to being the person who's just happy to be be a bit more circumspect.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's the birding side of thing. In terms of conservation, you did ask if anyone's interested in getting in conservation. The story of my career is it's all been about having making the right connections, and it's not it's about how you it's obviously about your ability and that sort of stuff as well, but one of the most important things is knowing the people to get to get to where you want to be. So I'd say to anyone who's interested in a career in conservation, reach out to me. Drop me an email, give me a phone call, or reach out to potential supervisors and just ask questions. That's if you want a career in it, that's what you have to do.
Good tips. Yeah, excellent. I'll pop your email in the show notes.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
You might get a flood of emails.
Happy to.
All right. Well, let's wrap up and proceed with the closing questions, Nick. It's been a fabulous conversation. Really interesting. And so I'm sure listeners are keen to know the two questions. So, what's your favorite bird?
Oh, I can't really. If I say anything other than night parrot, I'd be a fool. But no. Look, night parrots. I mean, the reason I love night parrots is because, as a young birder growing up, in the 80s and 90s, like I knew what night parrots were. I'd read I'd see them in the field guide and just go, wow, night parrot. I wonder if they're out there. And if you told me in 2013, Nick, you are going to do a PhD on night parrots, I just would have laughed. Like, that's impossible. It can't happen. So look, a bird that has that sort of pull and that sort of the myth surrounding it, and to be able to get to work. And like I said, I can't say I have a favorite bird except for that one, I don't think. But I will say that a superb parrot always has a soft, like I said, always had a soft spot in my heart for superb parrot, because it was, like I said, it was the first bird I saw that I knew was a bit rare or that was a bit different. And aside from just being a stunning bird, I always get a kick out of when I when I was guiding and I'd see superb parrots, I'd always just get a bit of a smile on my face. So
Yeah.
there you go, night parrot and superb parrot.
Brilliant.
And
I love
my
it.
dream bird, my dream bird to keep the parrot theme going is princess parrot. I've never seen a princess parrot, and in the wild, obviously. And so I would, like I said, I think that's me.
Yeah.
If I could pick one that I wanted to see, that'd be it.
Well, they probably have. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is right. They've got surely some overlap with the night parrot range.
There's overlap in the sense that princess parrots have been seen in areas where night parrots occur, but their core ranges are probably going to be a little bit separate.
Right.
So there's that. I mean, the trip I was on the other week on Nuremberg, I was always had an eye out. You never know what was going to fly over, but yeah, no, I was unlucky.
Lovely. Yep. And final closing question is: I know that your favorite destination is the birding destination is Papua New Guinea. Is that accurate?
Yeah, for sure. So, but I don't know if someone, if Jane said to me, Nick, you can go away for 2 weeks birding and money's not an object, I'd go to New Guinea. I love it there. It's challenging. It's the birds are just amazing. When you talk about what's your favorite bird, I mean, how can you, I can't believe it's not bluebird of paradise or crested satin bird or something like that. Like these birds are just, they're just stunning. So I'd love to go to New Guinea. I've never been to I've never been to Papua. I've only ever been to Papua New Guinea in the PNG. So I've never been to Irian Jaya. So I'd love to, like I said, if I had 3 weeks and 10 grand, I'd pay to go on a birding tour to West Papua and go and see Wilson's Bird of Paradise and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, amazing.
If I had to go somewhere in Australia, I always like, I don't know why, I like the stretch flight from Katherine to Kununurra, like the southwest top end. That's always been a favorite place I want to go birding to.
Lovely. Yeah, so many places. Just one final thought about Papua New Guinea and that environment. How similar is it to? I've often wondered this. How similar is it to this part of Australia, Cairns and up to Iron Range, Cape York? Is it ecologically almost identical, or are there very big differences?
There are differences. So one of the really weird thing about going to New Guinea is all the bird families are the same. So you're seeing robins, you're seeing whistlers, you're seeing honey eaters, you're seeing birds of paradise, or parrots. Like a lot of the families are the same. So it's weird. It's weird like that to see. Like I said, you see these things and they're the same but different. The difference in New Guinea is just it's more tropical. It's just the diversity. So you can see. I was looking back through some notes the other day for a trip I did to New Guinea to like the North Slope to a place not far from Madang. And it was, we just did this research station, never went further than a couple of kilometers from the research station. And the list for the 4 or 5 days we were there was like 120 species or something, like, which in a small area is pretty amazing. I remember there was this one fruiting tree, and I remember watching it. And at one time I could identify 8 species of fruit dove in the tree. So that's what New Guinea's like. It's like, it's all the exciting things of tropical North Queensland, but just with the volume turned up. So there's just more diversity. I mean, but if diversity is your thing, I did a similar thing when I was in Ecuador. Went to like a lodge in the Amazon. I was there for about a week with a couple of mates who, luckily, they knew the birds because I'd never been to the Amazon before. And in a week, never going further than about 4 or 5 kilometers from the research station, as a group, we recorded 330 species. Like that's just mind blowing. And if I'd been by myself, I would have identified maybe like 150 of them. Like these guys were serious Amazon birders and went, Nick, that's a this, Nick, that's a this. And I was like, okay. So New Guinea is that's the thing about New Guinea. It's just like I said, it's the same. It's similar in that it's all the same families, just more species.
Yeah, amazing. Oh, well, that's a fantastic note to end on, Nick. It's been an absolute joy, really. Thank you.
Yep. No, Tom, thanks for having me on.
All right, thanks, Nick. Well, take care, happy birding, and all the best.
Talk to you next time. See you, mate.
See ya. Thank you so much for listening to or watching this episode of the Birding Today podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to find out more about the show, you can follow me on all my social media platforms. The links are in the description and in the show notes. And if you want to take it a step further, you can also support me on Patreon as well. Thank you, happy birding, and I'll catch you in the next episode.